everything. All of us know that we're going to die at some point. All of us know that all of our loved ones are going to die at some point. Yet, we live our lives as if this is never going to happen. There is this unimaginably weird, different situation that you think you knew how to handle, but you do not anymore. In such immensely complicated situations, we tend to find connection, we tend to find growth of a higher degree. My personal experience has been that it felt like a hollow. Hello, good people of the internet. I wanted today's episode of the Unlearning Playground to be around death. More specifically, around death, grieving, and the process of moving on. Very importantly, about moving on. Now, I feel that we live in an environment which is not too conducive to even having conversations on the topic of death. And I'll come to the main reason why I'm having this conversation today with you in a later part in today's episode. But firstly, I wanted to narrate a story around death, around specifically why and how we do not really talk about death. It is said that there was once a dinner party organized by a hostess, and she had a lot of different friends over to her house, and they had dinner, they were chatting about things, etc. And somehow, as usually may be the case, the conversation went on to be about death. And the hostess was asking her friends, her guests, what do they feel will happen after death? And there were opinions coming from all over the place. Some people were saying we'll finally get to meet God and get answers about all those questions that we've been pondering over. Some people were saying that death is nothing. We just start living in some other place and we're all immortal in that sense. And some people were talking about a lot of other things too. Now, she noticed that there's one old guy who was not talking too much. He was very active previously, but ever since the topic of death came up, he didn't say anything at all. So she poked him, of course, right? She poked him and she said, why aren't you talking about it? What do you think will happen after you die? And the old man says, well, lady, I think I'll most definitely go to heaven, but I would rather not have such depressing conversations right now. Even a guy who thinks that he will go to heaven thinks that the conversation of death is depressing. Now, if that isn't a contradiction in itself, I do not know what is. And that brings me to the topic of death. Why I'm talking about death. Why I'm doing a podcast episode even. I think the last time I did a podcast episode, the last time I was in front of this mic, it was a good 5-6 months ago. My last podcast episode was in last year, November. And I've been wanting to do a podcast episode since quite a number of months now, quite a number of days now. And somehow just could not get to it. I've been busy with recording all the other videos that I've been recording. Oh, by the way, if you are consuming this on an audio platform, I'm firstly very grateful for you. You are a loyal subscriber. You're still consuming this on an audio platform. But I would highly recommend also checking out the YouTube channel alongside, because the YouTube channel is where the meat of the entire content that I'm producing is going out. So make sure you check out the YouTube channel too. And if you're watching this on the YouTube channel already, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and let's keep going. Now, something happened with your boy very recently, which made him talk about death. I mean, this was always a topic, by the way, in my list of topics that I wanted to do podcast episodes about. In fact, one of the first blogs that I had written when I had started writing blogs, I think this was way back in 2021, I guess, was on the topic of death. So this has always been a topic that I wanted to talk about. But almost a month ago, I lost my father. My father passed away due to a cardiac arrest. And it was a situation of immense emotional turmoil for me personally, of course, for the entire family too, of course. And also to a large degree for a lot of my friends and close friends who were around me, who were in touch with me. They could see how immensely vulnerable my entire family was during that time. Still is in some regard. It's just been a month. But we have been going through this process of grieving for my dad, of course. We've been going through the process of processing what has happened and how it happened and what our lives will be going forward, how this will change our lives going forward. And then we're also in the process of moving on. And it's beautiful how all of these things are coming together at the same time, simultaneously. It's almost like you're being pulled apart from a lot of different areas, very 2, 3, 4 extremely different opposing forces pulling you. But that is the beauty of life. Such is the beauty of life that in such immensely complicated situations, we tend to find connection, we tend to find growth of a higher degree. And that's why I wanted to do a podcast episode on this. And like I said, I've been wanting to do a podcast episode for so long, and this seemed like a very important topic to talk about. So I wanted to talk about death, of course. I wanted to keep along the spirit of something that I decided these podcast episodes are gonna sound like. It's gonna sound like I'm having a conversation with you, a one-on-one conversation with you. So in that spirit, this is not prepared as such. I only have a few key points I've written here that I want to talk about. But other than that, I just want it to be a free-flowing episode. That is what I would want all these episodes to be about. So I want to talk about death. I want to talk about grieving. I want to talk about healing. I want to talk about moving on. Yeah. So when I was thinking about death, when I was thinking about what happened, not specifically with my father, but because you're in an overwhelming situation in your life, it tends to make you think in manners that you're not used to usually thinking about. So I got reminded of this story I had read back in the day when I was reading the Mahabharata, which is one of the most epic novels you would ever come across. The depth of the numerous different characters it has, and the messaging and the divinity, the spirituality in that novel, it's amazing. So anyhow, not going into the depths of the Mahabharata right now, but one of the segments of the Mahabharata has Yudhishthir, who is one of the key protagonists in that novel. He's having a conversation with someone. I do not remember the exact story, but that's someone who's in front of Yudhishthir is supposed to be asking him a few questions, and if Yudhishthir is able to convince the other guy of his answers, I think the stipulation was that Yudhishthir's brothers will be let free, something of that sort. Anyhow, I'm not going to go into the details of all the questions, but one of the questions that is asked from Yudhishthir is, what is the most wonderful, what is the most amazing or shocking or astonishing thing about life? And Yudhishthir's answer was around the topic of death. He says something to the tune of, every day, every moment we see millions of life forms going to death. Every day, every moment we see millions of life forms dying. Yet every human being still lives as if he is immortal. Every human being still keeps on living as if he is not going to die. Now that is astonishing, that is shocking, that is wonderful. And that's true, isn't it? All of us know at some level, in fact, all of us know the exact thing. All of us know that we're going to die at some point. All of us know that all of our loved ones are going to die at some point. Yet, we live our lives as if this is never going to happen. Now, I'm not saying that we do not accept death. All of us sane human beings accept that death is going to happen for us and for our loved ones. But we act as if it's not going to happen. Where does this manifest? Something that is coming up in my mind right now is, it manifests in the petty little fights that we hold. It manifests in the petty little whimsies that we give into, despite of the fact that we know that this is not going to be forever. Host of other things, right? We spend our days doing things that we do not really love doing, yet we feel that it's okay. It's okay to keep doing that because we're always going to have time to do things that we really love to do, that we want to do. Crazy, isn't it? But yes, this is true. This is exactly true. And the next thing that I had actually noted down was, this was something extremely personal. This was a realization that hit me, I think, just the second or third day after my dad passed away. I was sitting with my mom and my sister and my wife, and my other sister was on a video call with us. We were just talking, and I don't know how this conversation started, but everyone on the call was feeling that it still feels surreal. It's been a couple of days since dad passed away, and it still feels surreal. It still feels that, did it really happen? Has it really happened? I mean, it feels so weird. It feels so different. It feels almost something that you cannot explain. And I think, for me personally, I was thinking the exact same thing just a day or a night back. And I had come to the conclusion that I personally had an image in my mind as to what it would be like when I lost a loved one. And I think all of us unconsciously have this sort of an image in our minds, that this is what the situation would look like. This is what it would feel like within us when we lose a loved one. And all of it is based out of course, what our experiences have been, what we have consumed on TV or movies or books, etc., all the rest of it. Of course, it comes from a very pure source. We feel as if this is how the situation is going to unfold, this is how we're going to feel in that kind of a situation. But when reality hits, when it actually happens, when you actually lose a loved one, when you actually experience death right in front of you, how it unfolds is almost 180-degree opposite to what you thought it would feel like. It's an alien feeling. Anyone who has experienced the death of a loved one, anyone who has experienced the death of someone they were very close with, would know what I'm talking about. It feels surreal. It feels surreal even till this day that my dad is not with me now. And somehow we grow via that experience, isn't it? I mean, I've always known that we have images of things in our heads, and that is what we project on the situations and on other people and on our life overall. And unlearning the attachment to all of those images and all of those preconceived biases is what the playground is, of course, about. But even then, when this overwhelming situation hit me in my life, I could see that the work is never done. The work is never done. We always have images in our heads, and they will always keep popping up. And sometimes the only thing that you can do is maybe just become aware of it and don't resist what is actually happening in the moment. Now, that brings me to the next section that I wanted to go into in this episode. I'm going to take a little break, and then we're going to start talking about the various different manifestations of all of these biases, all of these preconceived notions that we have around death, and how they end up almost hampering our process of consuming and processing and digesting and moving on from death. Let's take a little break and be back. Well, all right. The first thing I wanted to talk about was shame. Shame around death. Now, when I'm talking about shame concerning the topic of death, I of course mean it for the shame that people feel who have just witnessed death. So, shame of the survivors of that entire episode. Now, in one manifestation of that shame, the people who are left back, the people who are grieving, feel extremely ashamed if they are not grieving at all points during the day. It could very well happen. I think it is very obvious, at least to me, that this is how a person may feel, that such and such is the situation. This is so immensely overwhelming. This is such a massive setback for me, and I may never get out of this situation. This is an honest thought that can come into any person's mind. And then the very next moment, or a few moments after that, or a few days or hours after that, you could be smiling. You could be in a situation where, at least at that particular moment, you're not grieving. And then suddenly this little thought that had come into your mind a few moments back comes back again and makes you feel as if you're a bad person for not grieving all the time. It makes you feel ashamed for not grieving all the time. And if you are in such a situation right now, let me tell you, let me relieve you, you're not a bad person for not grieving all the time. Because where does this shame come from? If you think about it, it's almost always that, like I mentioned in the very beginning of this episode, all of us have an image in our minds of what it would feel like when we would see death around us, when we would see a loved one passing away. And one of those core images is of a grieving person. We imagine that we would be grieving almost inconsolably, which will happen at times. It's not that that image is absolutely incorrect, but that image is not the complete image of what the person would be. I mean, of course, you would be inconsolably sobbing at some point in the day, but it could be that at some point of the day you're fine and you're supposed to be fine. It's not supposed to be that you are grieving all the time incessantly. And I mean, if that is your way of processing it, if that is what is happening with you, by all means you should be doing that, and you should not be ashamed of that even. The long and short of it is that there are a lot of different kinds of manifestations of shame that can surround the survivor of such a scene. It could be that you feel that you are dishonoring the dead by being happy at some point. It could feel that you regret being the person who's now happy. And I think the only message I would give out at this particular juncture would be this song by Audio Slave, which I recently actually did a song review for also on YouTube. The song is Be Yourself. I absolutely love that song, and time and again during that song the lyricist has written and the singer has sung absolutely beautifully that to be yourself is all that you can do, especially in life situations that overwhelm us, especially in life situations where we act before we think. Almost we cannot really have that much mental capacity to process first and then act. In all such situations you have to drop your guard of fear and shame and let yourself be what you are in the moment. Just be yourself, and this too shall pass. And talking about shame should always accompany talking about fear, isn't it? The next subtopic, of course, that I wanted to talk about was fear surrounding the topic of death. Now, this fear can again manifest in the form of fear for your loved one who has just died, fear for yourself because you suddenly realize that there is this unimaginably weird, different situation that you think you knew how to handle, but you do not anymore. So there is a fear of the unknown in that sense. There is a fear of abandonment. There is a fear of almost feeling as if you will never be able to connect with other people because you do not want to feel abandoned ever again. You may feel abandoned by the dead. This is a perfectly normal emotion to feel. And there could also be fear of leaving your loved ones miserable when you die. So there are all of these, I think a host of other too, all of these different manifestations of fear surrounding the topic of death. And I can say that I could see in my own psyche when I was meditating after dad's death, I could see all of these different kinds of fears rising in me at some point or the other, in different degrees, of course. And I can safely say that this will be the case for a lot of different people. Every one of us feels not the same emotions, but feels similar emotions, and the difference is mostly of degree. So you would feel fear rising from the depths of your psyche in varying different degrees. But for me personally, how it transpired eventually was that even though there were all of these fears that were coming up, I could see that my dad's passing away, the overwhelming situation that was created because of that in our family, has actually brought me closer to my sisters and my mother, much more than we were close previously. I mean, we are a tightly knit family anyway, but this entire episode brought us so much closer because I don't know, it's weird that when you share the same victory, of course you feel connected and you feel very gelled together. But when you share the same defeat, when you share the same pain, the same sorrow, it kind of brings you closer in a way that cannot really be explained. And so what I mean to say is, even if you fear all of these fears coming over, even if you're feeling that there are all these different manifestations of fear coming over because of somebody's death, because of the news of somebody's death even, I want to assure you that this is not the end all be all. And of course, sometimes even despite of all of these fears, you feel connection of the highest degree that you almost thought impossible to ever witness in your life. And so this too shall pass. So now that we're done with fear and shame, I wanted to touch upon the process of grieving. How do we grieve the death of a loved one? How do we grieve the loss of someone who we thought or we acted as if they will never move away from us? It's extremely hard, isn't it? I mean, even if you are not in this position, you've never been in this position, you can imagine how hard it would be to simply process and accept the death of a loved one, someone who you used to live with daily. It's hard. It's extremely hard. So the process of grieving is especially hard for people who are extremely close to the one who has died. And I think one of the main pieces of advice I would give to anyone would be to be yourself, to not think too much about how you should be acting, how other people would be thinking about how you're acting, and how you would ever get over this grief. Rather than that, you should be in the moment and simply do what feels to be the most natural thing right now. For some of us, it could be sitting in silence. You need to sit in silence then. For some of us, it could be writing it out, penning it out in a diary. That's what your thing should be. For some of us, it could be talking to a friend, talking to someone else in the family. For someone, it could be simply crying out. And all of those things, all of these different manifestations of grieving are valid. So you need not be ashamed of what your thing is, how you are processing the emotion. You need to be you. You need to be yourself. And that is one of the biggest advices I think I can give out when it comes to grieving for a loved one. Be yourself. Do what you need to do in the moment to process the emotion. But having said that, I also want to touch briefly upon what you should not be doing. What should be the don'ts around the process of grieving. And for that matter, the first don't should be to not distract yourself away from the emotion. And I'm saying that as the first don't because this is almost a piece of advice that was coming at me left, right and center from a lot of different people. Distract yourself. Keep yourself busy in other things. Do this, do that, focus on this work. It'll take your mind off of your father, etc. And as someone who considers himself to be a very self-aware person, I knew that if I was to push this emotion aside, if I was to push the emotion of how sad I was, how demolished I was because of my father passing away, if I was to push this emotion away, it will come back. It will come back in some other way. It's almost like that cartoon back in my childhood days, Tom and Jerry, where Tom would smash the head of that dog with a bat, and there would be this what do you call it? It'll be some sort of a wound would raise on the dog's head, and Tom, to pretend that nothing has happened, would press it down and it'll come up on the other side, and then he would press here and it'll come here, etc, etc. You get what I'm trying to say, right? If you suppress your emotions, they do not stay suppressed for long. They come up in one form or the other. And therefore, the first don't that I would advise you if you're grieving for a loved one is to grieve for your loved one. Don't distract yourself away from the emotion. Even if it feels like that is the right thing to do, that is the easy thing to do, don't do that. At least don't do that all the time. Process the emotion. Take your time processing the emotion using all the different techniques that I mentioned previously. And this is so important. The next don't that I would want to talk about is don't worry too much about explaining to others how you are feeling. This is such an important realization that I had over this entire past month that I faced, that No matter how good you are with words, no matter how intelligent you are with words, no matter how good you are at reading other people, you still cannot understand the exact emotion that that other person is feeling, or let go of that other person. Even if you are the one who's feeling this deep, inconsolable grief within you, there is no word that you can come up with that will do justice to the feeling that you have. And that is something that is so profound, I would say, because, like I've always said on this channel too, reality is always beyond words. We try to cook up all of these different words and try to make sense of entire life in terms of these words, but when it boils down to the real nitty-gritties of life, all of reality is always beyond words. Every word is always going to be limited by the image that you have in your mind, limited by the image that someone else has in their mind, etc. So the long and short of it is, the second don't that I would give you if you're grieving for a loved one is to not worry too much about explaining to someone else what you are feeling deep within you. Because even if someone is good at understanding others, if they are not in this situation, it's very hard for them to even contemplate properly the degree of the emotion that you are feeling at the moment. So don't worry too much about it. And yes, I think that's about it. Letting things flow, not forcing too much. Similar to what we talked about initially, it could happen that, like I said, I was getting this advice from a lot of different people that distract yourself away and do this, do that, etc. And for me personally, I think I was able to process all of it by processing all of it, by not forcing things too much, by not forcing myself to move on too much, by not forcing my family members to move on so much, by simply being in the moment. And by being in the moment would not mean that you're always crying. I know for a fact that over the last month or so, I have had some moments where I've sobbed inconsolably. But there have also been moments when I've laughed out loud like a madman. And that's supposed to happen too. I'm not ashamed of that. You have to be yourself. You have to let things be as they are without forcing things to be according to the image that you have in your mind. I hope that helps. And now then, I wanted to touch upon the last topic that I've written here around the topic of death, which is, surprisingly, life after death. Life after death, not of the person who has died. Of course, we're not going into that in this episode. This is life after death of the survivors, of someone who's grieving for the dead and is supposed to be moving on, will be moving on, or has moved on. What shape does life take after death of a loved one? Now, my personal experience has been that it felt like a hollow. It felt suddenly that after my dad passed away, I could feel this hollow in my heart or in my mind, somewhere, manifested somewhere in my body. But I could feel that there is some hollow left because my dad has passed away. And I think it will be sort of a similar feeling for everyone who experiences the death of a loved one, that there is sort of a hollow left within you somewhere. For some people, it could be a massive hollow because their entire day was maybe around this person and you do not know what to do with your day anymore. And also, a very close cousin of this feeling could be that you could feel that sort of a burden lifted off your shoulders. You could feel, in one manner of speaking, that you are more free than what you were when that person was alive. Now, this is not a feeling to be ashamed of, firstly, because I personally feel that this is going to take a rather tricky turn, but I still want to attempt talking about this. One of the core purposes of life is to be something, is to become something, is to offer something to the world, in one manner of speaking, is to offer something to all of life with a capital L. And it could happen that because we get so entangled within our petty little lives, that the drama that we have surrounding our life has made it so restricted that there is no expansion happening anymore, that there is no offering happening anymore. There is no becoming happening anymore in this arc of life. And therefore, death, in that manner of speaking, can be sort of a release from that entanglement. Of course, for the one who died, but also for the ones who survived. And in that manner of speaking, that will show up in your life in the form of a burden being lifted, sort of some chains being broken away from you, and you're feeling lighter, you're feeling freer. This will always be accompanied by a feeling of shame, of course, because you will feel ashamed of feeling that this person who has passed away was holding you back. But it's true, isn't it? Our relationships, in one manner of understanding, are what tie us down. Now, they can tie you down like chains tie a prisoner down, or they can tie you down like an anchor would tie a boat down. So the boat would go all over the sea wherever it has to, but then it comes back to the anchor. In both of these situations, you are being restricted in one manner of speaking. And therefore, the death of a loved one in a relationship can actually be a burden lifted off of your shoulders in that manner. And now, for the person who has survived this sort of a scenario, I think one of the key things that that person should be focusing on is to fill up that hollow. There are only a few moments in our lives, especially when you become an adult, when you get busy with life, when you have a job, you have kids, you have wife, you have a husband or whatnot. You get so busy with your life that there are only a few moments you get where you can actually sit back and actually take stock of what you actually want to take forward in your life. And the death of someone you were in a relationship with creates a hollow, creates a freedom of sorts for you to actually fill that hollow now with something that you actually want to take with you. So here is a meditation that you should be doing when or if you are in such a situation. Control your breath. That is, of course, how we start all of our meditations. But then focus on what is the feeling that you want to feel. What is the emotion that you actually want to feel? And go towards that. Try to see how that feeling, that emotion can manifest in your life, and try to go towards that feeling or that emotion. Try to fill up that hollow that you have in your life now with something that is more meaningful to you. And then the next thing that I've written here, this is something I think it can be triggering for a lot of people, but I still want to talk about it because I think it is extremely important. This is very close to what I talked about initially in this episode when I was narrating that story of Yudhishthir. We see death all around us, all the time, and all of us know somewhere deep down that all of us are gonna die. Yet we still keep living as if we are immortals, as if death will not happen to us or for us or to the loved ones that we are around, etc., etc. And therefore, if and when you are in a situation where a close one has died, where you are experiencing death in extremely close proximity, it can actually serve a massive purpose for you. It can serve this purpose for you that you actually question your own life. You question whether what you are spending your life doing is actually worth doing. Because, hear me out. Of course, for a lot of us, we are doing things that we're doing under the banner of this is secure, this is safe, this is familiar, this is what I know how to do, etc. But then suddenly something like death happens and you know that there is no guaranteed safety. There is no guaranteed security. There is no guarantee to life because death is the guarantee. So now, because you always knew it, but it had never manifested in your life, but now that you're seeing it manifest right in front of you, it can actually trigger you to the point that you start to question whether what you're spending your life doing is actually worth doing or not. And I think this is something you should meditate on. This is something that you should spend more of your time doing. Because if you are out of alignment, the death of someone close by, I mean, if you're out of alignment with what your core purposes could be, with what your highest purpose could be in your life, the death of a close one can actually serve a very meaningful means to an end. It can serve a very meaningful blow to you so that you start to question whether you should be actually focusing on something else or not. And see, if you will die at some point in time, shouldn't you really be thinking whether something you are doing is worth your time or not? Because in that manner of speaking, all of us have limited time on this earth, isn't it? And then if what you're doing is not really the highest thing that you could be doing, shouldn't you at least spend some of your energy, some of your waking hours to try and manifest whatever your highest purpose could be in life? I think it's only obvious that all of us should. Well, okay then, that is where I think we'll come to the end of today's episode. This was an open-ended episode, and what I wanted to do was touch upon these different elements, these different manifestations of fear and shame and grieving and life after death, which I have experienced and my family has experienced over the past month or so. I feel that my father's death has served a massive purpose for us, and more of the manifestations of that purpose will come forward in the months and the years to come, of course. I don't know if moving on is the right word, because it's not like we will move on from his death as if we'll forget him. It's not possible in that manner of speaking. But of course, we're not grieving as much as we were when it had just happened. And it has, of course, made me question that I want to spend more of my waking hours doing things that are more meaningful for me, doing things that are more meaningful just overall, even objectively. And on that note, I think I now want to go and hug my mom tightly for some time. So if you will excuse me, I think I'll call this an end to today's episode. Again, a reminder, a lot of my content is coming out in the form of videos on the YouTube channel. So if you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, make sure you go ahead and do that. Make sure you like this video on the YouTube app or website or wherever you're consuming it. If you're consuming this on a podcast platform, rate the show, leave us a rating, and it helps reach this content to more and more people as the time goes on. And of course, share this video with as many people as you can, and I'll see you in the playground the next time. Until next time, peace out.